Thank you, Manolo. I'm Jack, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about a new approach to studying tropicalization in the Western Mediterranean. So a little bit about why we think this is important. So the Mediterranean is a real biodiversity hotspot in the world. I mean, the surface area of the Mediterranean is less than 1%, but the species we find, there's more than 8,500 species, and somewhere between 4 and 18% of all the microscopic organisms in the world. So it's a very important place in terms of biodiversity, especially if the tropicalization is going to lead to a change in the biology. Here's some data from a paper by Bianchi and Morris. As you can see, I've circled the relevant things for fishes, which is the main point of the study today. So together we've got about 13.6% of all of the fish found globally are found in the Mediterranean. It's also very important to think about the fact that lots of the species are endemic to the Mediterranean. So we don't find them anywhere else in the world. So if the tropicalization is going to make a big ecosystem shift, then it's an important thing to study. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the development of the Mediterranean and why it's so biodiverse. So about 200 million years ago, during the Triassic, we start to have a shift in the continents away from Pangaea, and you start to get the formation of this Tethys Sea or Tethys Ocean. And as the continents shift further, we start to have more of a semi-enclosed basin in which the modern Mediterranean is. So moving on a bit further in the history, about 6 million years ago, we then have what's known as the Messinian salinity crisis. So lots of the Mediterranean, as we know it, is dried up, and you get these very large salt deposits. So the species that are left at this point are only endemic to the Mediterranean, and these are the ancient species which were found previously in the tropical Tethys. We then move forward again to about 5.3 million years ago, where you have the flooding of the Strait of Gibraltar. So all the water from the Atlantic begins to fill up this basin. So you then have a major introduction of species from the Atlantic. So now, as well as the endemic species, you have Atlantic species being introduced as well. It's also important to think about shifts in the species as glacial periods occur. So generally, when you have these glacial periods, the boreal species from the Arctic move towards the equator, towards the warmer water, lots of which come into the subtropical regions like the Mediterranean. Conversely, you sort of have the movement during these interglacial periods of tropicalization. So that's the poleward movement of species from the tropics into the subtropics. This is important because now we have the ancient species, we have the species from the Atlantic, and then we have now species from Arctic seas and the tropical seas as well. So this is another part of the migration. So in 1869, the Suez Canal was finished. So this is one of the major ecosystem shifts we see in the last sort of 200 years. Species which previously in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea would have had no way of migrating around into the Mediterranean have suddenly this ability to migrate. And this is a pretty major one. I mean, lots of the species now which we consider tropicalized species, things like the lionfish and the dwarf lionfish, which are, I'm sure as many of you know, are very are quite a big problem, especially in the eastern Mediterranean. But it's also important to consider tropicalization is not the only factor that's causing these migrations. So these are a couple of anthropogenic factors, things done by humans. So as shipping's increased, we have this uptake of ballast water, which is used to balance ships, especially cargo ships where they have lots of weight on them. So these cargo ships might be found in the Americas or in tropical regions. They then uptake water for their ballast, and then when they come into port, places like Málaga, you then have the discharge of the water, which then releases these organisms. Generally, they're either fish larvae or smaller crustaceans or algae, but this can make a quite big difference. Fouling's another thing to think about. Previously, ships didn't have anti-foul like they do today, so lots of organisms could be transported on the hulls of ships. So that's another important consideration. Generally today, aquaculture is becoming an increasingly more important thing in the Mediterranean. The fish stocks, basically, because they're being farmed, increase massively. And then when you have a storm event, you either have breaches in the nets which allow the fish to escape, or you have floods where the fish can come over the top and enter the ecosystem. The main problem with this is the numbers of fish found are quite considerable compared to those found in the local ecosystems, and they can really cause a big shift because of predation and so forth. There's a couple of other human factors that are important to think about, things like aquariums, scientific research, so what you people are doing, which also can cause this anthropogenic migration. So obviously the area in which we're working is in the Mediterranean Climate Change Group, so what relevance does climate change have to this tropicalization? So this is from Copernicus, from the 80s until now, and in the blue we have a monthly recording of the sea surface temperatures, and the red is a more steady yearly one. So we can clearly see that there's an increasing temperature. It's pretty undeniable. And this is really important because of the tropicalization. So the driving thing with tropicalization is the rising sea surface temperatures. So we basically wanted to understand the extent to which the Western Mediterranean is undergoing a tropicalization process. And actually there's not been many papers on this before. There's a recent one done in the Institute by Torreblanca and Baez, which is something which we've based a lot of our work around. So the previous approach really has been using, basically they created a massive list of species. So 461 native species they collected. I think this was in the Baez paper previously, 2015. This created a massive list of the species which we now know are in the Mediterranean. So this is very important for our work. They also, in the more recent paper, 2025, established a list of the new alien species being found in the Mediterranean. So I think it's between 2015 and 2019 these species were recorded. So 10 non-indigenous species in the Essal region, which is the Gibraltar Strait and the Alboran Sea, and then the 15 in the Levantine and Balearic Sea. The approach before was taking generalized species temperatures from FishBase, which is a big online database of information about different fish species, and creating a temperature range and an average temperature, and then comparing the new tropical species temperature ranges to these found natively in the Mediterranean, and making a comparison between the two to judge the level of tropicalization. We found, because some of the species, like anchovies and sardines, are found in a much greater region than just the Mediterranean, we found that the temperature ranges were not temperatures which we knew were occurring natively in the Mediterranean. So take something like sardines, they can be found all the way from the South Atlantic to the North Sea and the Baltics, which getting temperatures like 7.1 degrees, which are, I'm sure most of you know, are temperatures which we never find in the Mediterranean, even in winter. So we wanted to make a more specific climatological analysis of the temperature ranges of the native species in order to sort of have a better numerical understanding of tropicalization. So we took data from the Met Office, recorded between 1982 and 2024. There you go. And then did some monthly average temperature depth profiles for each of these. So on the left here we have the SL region. These are our borders for it, and here you have the Libre region, the Levantine Barrier area. So for each month we have a temperature profile up here. So obviously these ones are the colder ones, the January, February, December, etc. And then here you have July, August, September. We also calculated the standard deviations for each of these month profiles to give us a better understanding of what's going on. So this is a little bit of a comparison between previous methods and our methods. So in the blue here on the left, you see the temperature ranges for these species globally. So you can see that 7.1 is a temperature we're never finding in the Mediterranean. And here's a more accurate version using our climatological data, giving the average temperatures at the depths in which we find these species. So as you can see, there's quite a considerable difference between the temperature ranges we've found. This is a little diagram we did just to ensure that what we were doing was worthwhile. So the lines here are our minimum and maximum temperature profiles for each region. So in red we have the maximum temperatures, and in blue we have the minimum temperatures. The dots are then the data taken from fish base, which was used in the previous approaches. And if the species data and the climatological data which we took was the same, you would see a profile with all the dots inside. But here, as you can see, there's lots of outliers. So we then saw that it was essential to narrow this down to temperatures just within the Mediterranean. So this is a bit of a comparison again between our methodologies. So on the left here you see these are box whisker plots. These red lines are the median temperatures. We use medians instead of means because these don't follow a normal distribution. So this is the data taken from fish base, and this is our data using the Mediterranean climatology. So as you can see, there is a difference between these. In the middle here, these are the alien species, the new records, the temperatures for those. So as you can see in the previous approach, there is clearly a significant difference between the native species and the alien species. But we actually found that when we used our climatology, it was slightly smaller than we'd previously thought. And then in terms of the maximum temperature, we actually found that there was a different relationship going on. So we found that the temperatures of the Mediterranean are actually, in some cases, higher than, in terms of maximum temperature, are actually higher than the temperatures found in the native habitats of these new species. So the tropical temperatures were actually lower than the temperatures we were finding in the Mediterranean. On average, though, you can see these are pretty similar. So the tropical temperatures for these tropical species are not super far off the temperatures found in the Mediterranean. So while the trend is generally the same between the previous approach and ours, the temperature being lower, the difference is considerably smaller when we take into account the temperatures found in the Mediterranean. For the Libre region, we actually found that the temperatures in terms of minimum temperature in our climatology were actually slightly higher in terms of the median than the new records. And when it came to the maximum temperatures, they were pretty considerably higher than the tropical species. And as we can see on the mean temperature, there's a pretty significant difference from the medians between the alien species and the species found at those relevant depths in the Mediterranean. So something important to take into account is the depth. Obviously, a species might be a surficial species, so if they lived in the Mediterranean, you might think their habitat is naturally warmer because they're at the surface. But say they lived in the tropics and they were at a lower depth, they might have the same temperature range, but they're clearly at a different depth. So we wanted to do something which took that into account. So in red here, we have the temperature ranges of the alien species. And in blue here, we have the relevant temperature within the Mediterranean for the same depth levels. So we took the depth from the database, the fish-based database of these, the depth ranges, applied them to the Mediterranean and actually found the temperatures within the Mediterranean that we find these species at. And as we can see, there is a difference in the temperatures. We did this for all 10 of the new species found in the Awan Sea and the Gibraltar Strait region, and then the same for the 15 found in the Levantine Balearic Sea. So this is a bit of a temperature comparison. Species by species. So these are the new records within each region, and in red we have their temperatures when they're found in the tropics, and then in blue we have the relevant temperature within the Mediterranean for their depth range. So as you can see, it's not necessarily as clear as previously thought. Species up here are clearly species which are tropicalizing because their temperature range is much higher than the temperatures we're finding at their relevant depths within the Mediterranean. We can't really make a sweeping statement with this, though, because it doesn't apply for all the species. And actually, when we look at the Levantine and Balearic Sea, we see that lots of the temperature ranges of the tropical species are actually lower than the temperatures we're finding for their depth range in the Mediterranean. So here, these are generally not supporting tropicalization of these species. But in the Gibraltar and Albion Sea, these species here, where their temperature is higher than the relevant temperature found, we can say that these are species which are tropicalizing. This is very important, as it means we can't make a sweeping statement for all species. We can't say that everything is tropicalizing. We have to be more specific to a species level, and make sure that in future our understanding is more numerical than previous approaches. So this is a bit of a summary. So what we found was that when we used the climatology, the Mediterranean temperatures were significantly different from those for the temperature ranges of the species we find in the Mediterranean. So we established from this that the fish-based temperature ranges are not really appropriate to describe the habitats within the Mediterranean of these fish species, because they were based off the entire global distribution and not a specific temperature range within the Mediterranean. We found that when we used the Mediterranean temperatures for species in the Gibraltar Strait and the Albion Sea, the minimum and mean temperatures of those alien species, the non-endemic species, were actually higher than those of the native ones. So that is in support of tropicalization. But actually the temperature differences were maybe not as much as we previously thought. Vice versa, in the Levantine and Balearic, we actually found that in our studies at least, the alien species always had a lower temperature than the temperatures we were finding in the Mediterranean. So this is suggesting that these species are possibly moving due to anthropogenic factors. So the stuff we previously talked about, the ballast water or the migration through the Suez Canal, instead of tropicalization. One thing we will say though is it's important to consider that the depth ranges are not necessarily the same. I mean, a species which moves from a tropical region into the Mediterranean might find that the habitats in which it can live in terms of temperature are at a different depth range to what they're currently at. So careful attention should really be paid to each species on an individual front and the depth level in which they live. So yeah, I think that summarizes everything. These are some acknowledgements. The people we've been working with within the climate change team, and also some of the people here who've done previous works on tropicalization. I just thought I'd mention Fishbase and the Met Office for our data as well. But yeah, that's everything. Thank you very much for listening, and I welcome any questions. So, yeah, thank you.